Going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Vermont State Board of Education. It is Friday, August 18th, 12:32 p.m. And if we could start off, Maureen, if you could call the order, please, or I'm sorry, do the roll call.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Tom Levitt,
Present.
Leah Wilburn,
Present.
Kimberly Gleason,
Here.
Richard Werner, Tammy Colby,
Good afternoon.
Lyle Jepson, Jenna O'Farrell, Mohammed Job,
Present.
Gray Theron, checking again on Jenna O'Farrell.
I think he is able to join us at 1 o'clock.
Okay. And Chair Samuelson, obviously.
I'm here. Good morning or good afternoon. All right, thank you for that. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Okay, so moving on, this brings us to public to be heard. It looks like we've got a bit of a full house, and what I'd like to do is get just a show of hands of how many people wish to be heard, just so that we can budget our time. So I see one hand raised.
And it's *5 to raise your hand if you're on the phone. *5 to put it down.
And I'm not sure how to raise my hand, but this is Seth Bumper, so I'd like to.
Okay. So it looks like I'm seeing maybe 3 hands. There's a phone number ending in 6784, and then another number. Does anyone see more than 4 hands? Oh, now 5 hands.
I see 5 hands.
Okay. So what I would like to propose, I don't want to cut anyone off. We did suggest 2 minutes per person. I think, considering that we've got some members of the General Assembly joining us today, I think if we use that as a guide, I'm not going to cut you off. So I think the first hand I saw was Mary Catherine Stone.
Thank you. Am I clear to
Yes.
go right now?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Members of the State Board of Education, we are writing as a group of legislators concerned about the State Board of Education's proposed changes to the Rule Series 2200. We strongly believe that all students who attend publicly funded schools benefit from and deserve high quality education standards. We're also deeply concerned about the State Board's lack of transparency with processes making proposed changes and decisions that impact schools funded by taxpayer dollars. The revised education
You froze.
members from historically marginalized
Oh.
meeting minutes, the State Board decided not to apply the proposed education quality standards to private schools, choosing instead to reopen Rule Series 2200 to apply the provisions of Act 1 to independent schools. The State Board has incorporated select portions of Act 1 updates to the EQS, but not all into the rule, effectively replicating an unjust, separate but equal approach when it comes to ensuring quality education funded by taxpayer dollars. Proposed changes range from intentionally vague to unlawful by their violation of state and federal anti-discrimination laws, as well as their overt questioning of whether these anti-discrimination statutes apply to them. No school is immune from challenges related to creating and maintaining a safe and equitable environment for all students. Our state is not immune to the many biases and discriminatory practices that we would be quick to judge as unacceptable in others. Therefore, it is imperative that all schools receiving taxpayer dollars adhere to the same rules that are designed to ensure a high-quality, inclusive education in which ensure every child feels valued and has a fair chance to succeed. What happens in our schools has lasting impacts far beyond the roughly 18 years leading up to graduation, and it is not contained within the walls of any building. Today's classrooms are tomorrow's communities. Making public investment in education one of the most important of all state investments. All schools receiving public funds must be held to the same standards and must naturally come under the same level of public accountability. As concerned lawmakers, we urge you to make the entire EQS, including the Act 1 provisions, apply to all publicly funded schools. Thank you, Representative Mary Catherine Stone and others, and public comment was submitted. So hopefully y'all heard that. I heard that I may have been going in and out, so happy to read it again if need be.
Thank you, Representative Stone. You did cut out at the very beginning and then you came back. And I was going to invite you to submit your comments, but I just understood you to say that you already have submitted them.
Yes, they were emailed prior to the meeting to Maureen in their full entirety.
Okay. So if it's okay with you, what I would like to do is link them to our meeting minutes so that will be available to all members as well as members of the public.
Okay, and there were 8 signatures from members of the General Assembly, including myself. And those are also included on that public comment document.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe the next person that I heard from was Representative Bongartz.
I don't know how to lower my hand. Do I hit raise again?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm assuming that you have received the letter from the 4 heads of school responding to the letter from the Alliance. Is that correct?
I have not seen it, but I'm seeing other people raising their or shaking their head.
Okay, because I sort of, so the letter from the 4 heads of school, of course, makes clear that the independent schools are more than amenable to having the parts of Act 1 that apply to obviously the anti-discrimination rules, and other parts of it apply to them as long as it's done in a way that comports with the differences between an independent school and a public school. So I want to just start off by saying that I am the 15-year chair of Burton. I left Burton when I was elected to the legislature in 2020. I'm now a state legislator, and I was a member of the Act of the 2017 study committee that led to Act 173. And I just really feel today the need to respond to the inflammatory letter from the Equity Alliance, where they imply that independent schools are somehow trying to position themselves to discriminate or to avoid the intent of these rules, and they are absolutely not doing that. And given the dedication, the 25 years I spent around this and the dedication these schools have to serving kids in needs, it's really very discouraging to hear that kind of stuff. So, and the reality is that anytime you hear others talk about Vermont's independent schools, the vast majority of which serve kids from across the socioeconomic strata, just like the public schools, as private schools, you're dealing with a political agenda and you are the subject of an attempt at manipulation. The Alliance is an advocacy organization with an anti-independent school agenda. Fine, that's what they're doing. But here, they're actually, and ironically, given what they said, they're actually engaged in a backdoor attempt to subvert the legislative process and force all aspects of these rules on independent schools, precisely because they haven't been successful doing so in the legislature. In fact, as the letter you received today from the 4 heads of school, and actually the one you received from Senator Campion as well, these schools support those parts of the rules that have to do with discrimination and other key aspects. But the rules as worded are kind of one size fits all, and they don't necessarily fit the governance structure of independent schools. So again, as the letter from the 4 heads of schools states, these schools are happy to be brought under the umbrella of the key elements of Act 1, as long as the way they're added to the structure accounts for the differences in the way public and independent schools operate. So, and the bottom line here is that there's a process for determining whether rules comport with legislative intent. That process runs through ICAR and it runs through LCAR, and I sit on LCAR, as a matter of fact, and we'll take up that question when the rules get to us. You've engaged in a fully open, fully transparent process. Thank you for your work. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. And if you
Yeah.
have written comments that you wish to submit, I would invite you to do that as well.
Okay, I'll add those. Yeah, to the record.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
The next hand, let's see who it is. And Maureen, I might just need your help on this because I'm only seeing like the first 2 digits.
Or do you want me to just read a number? And
Oh, okay. So I think it's the phone number ending in 6322. *6 to unmute. And if you could introduce yourself, and I will say again, if you have anything in writing that you wish to submit to the board to be included with the minutes, I invite you to do that as well. So cell phone ending in 6322. It looks like they might still be muted. You would need to hit *6 to unmute.
Good afternoon. This is a phone number ending in 6332. Is that who you were calling on?
63.
Thank you. I couldn't, yes, hi. I couldn't unmute, sorry. Hi, for the record, my name is Amanda Garces. I'm the Director of Policy and Education Outreach for the Vermont Human Rights Commission. And today I am calling to provide feedback on the proposed amendments to the Rule 2200 series and the procedural developments that have taken place. I want to express my gratitude for the recent discussions regarding discrimination provisions, which represent a commendable step toward ensuring the protection of all students in our state. As a state, we have made significant progress in our commitment to inclusivity, exemplified by the existence of the Act 1 working group, which I chaired. However, I have observed that the current phase of this process may not sufficiently incorporate public input, potentially hindering the attainment of an impartial outcome that truly addresses the interests of all students in independent schools. To uphold transparency, fairness, and equity principles, it is essential that our processes remain consistently inclusive. While I understand the pressures and urgency you may be facing, I am concerned about the unprecedented accelerated pace of the current process. These departures from established practices could inadvertently exclude voices crucial to shaping our community's well-being. Every decision you make profoundly impacts our communities, and it is your duty to ensure their voices are not only heard, but genuinely valued. I strongly urge a moment of reflection on our current approach, aligning it with the guiding principles that have served you very well in the past. The significance of listening to marginalized communities cannot be overstated. Their unique challenges and perspectives are vital for a comprehensive understanding of the issues at hand. Let us reinforce our commitment to fairness and guarantee that individuals from all backgrounds have an equal opportunity to shape our collective future. By embracing diverse thought and ensuring decisions reflect our community's collective wisdom, we can make well-informed and comprehensive choices. I have spent the last 24 hours attempting to comprehend the changes and even their potential impact on EQS language. The rush process prevents me from providing a specific and substantial comments that I fear may not be heard during the ICAR process. For example, I recommend further clarity on subsection 22.3.2 in the last paragraph, where it was changed to say does not embody the intent of the board to promote welcoming, inclusive, bias-free environments for learning in Vermont schools, to something like discriminatory actions contradict the board's aim to establish a nurturing and unbiased educational environment in Vermont schools where inclusivity, welcoming attitudes, and freedom from bias are actively promoted. I also see it, I think sections within the EQS that could be beneficially included in this rule or warrant further discussion have to do with instructional materials, data collection, professional learning, culturally responsive teaching, and mechanisms for ensuring accountability. I thank you for thoughtfully considering this matter. I'm confident that through collaborative efforts, we can establish a decision-making process that genuinely serves the best interests of our entire community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I believe the next number that I'm seeing, the last 4 digits are 4629. So just a reminder, *6 to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon. For the record, this is Jay Nichols, the Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. The VPA has a deeply shared belief that all Vermont children should be equally valued and that all Vermont children are equally important to our future as a state. This means the same set of basic rules for schools should apply for any school, public or private, that is receiving taxpayer-supported funds. At the VPA, our Executive Council Governing Board has dubbed this same dollars, same rules. This is a mantra we hope the State Board and the legislature will recognize as one of fundamental fairness going forward, and that is essential for the educational and economic vitality of our state. We've heard that private or independent schools should have a different set of rules. We think that is true if a school is truly independent. However, any school that is receiving taxpayer dollars to operate is not independent, but rather dependent on the state, and therefore should follow the same rules. Let's move away from our current publicly segregated system and show all Vermont children that we value them equally. Separate but equal did not work to improve our society when minority students were discriminated against after the Civil War and into the modern education era, and that approach doesn't work now. Thank you.
Thank you. The next hand I'm seeing is Hudson Ranney.
Hello, my name is Hudson Ranney. I am the student representative on the Mount Ascutney School District Board in Windsor, Vermont. Well, there is public school. There are independent schools that don't accept taxpayer dollars. A majority of them are, such as St. Johnsbury Academy, Linden Institute, Sharon Academy, and so many more. And people send these kids that taxpayer dollars do go to those kids, those schools. And I feel that if it really does not serve those students right if these independent schools do not have to follow equity mandates. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to be heard? All right. I'm not seeing any.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Jay Green. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the policy and research analyst for the Office of Racial Equity. I appreciate the opportunity to provide our comments. I'll be following up with an official letter of comment from our office once it's approved by Executive Director of Racial Equity, Susanna Davis. And apologies for interrupting Amanda earlier. I wanted to echo Amanda's comments from the Vermont Human Rights Commission that our office is concerned with the lack of procedural equity that's being shown in the process of adopting these new Rule 2200 related to the independent school program approval. And we're concerned with the fact that these meetings are being held during typical working hours, which may prohibit adequate public participation from working parents. We're also concerned with the general lack of consideration for the needs of parents and students who use languages other than English. I was looking on the School Board of Education and the Agency of Education website, and I did not notice any notices of language assistance, which is federally required to be provided free of charge to the recipient. There's no information to get to facilitate participation by parents of English language learner students who are likely to be impacted by these proposed rule changes, especially the rule changes regarding culturally appropriate education standards. So I will follow up by sending you all our office's written comments, but I wanted to echo the Vermont Human Rights Commission's concerns with a lack of public participation in these meetings on a vitally important part of the education quality standards implementation process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to be heard? Okay, I do just want to reassure everyone and remind everyone where we are today is really discussing and potentially voting on whether to begin the formal APA rulemaking process. Everything that's been done up until this point today is pre-filing work, which is not part of the APA rulemaking process. And I just want to assure everyone that once the rule series is open, as with any other rule series that the board has opened, there will be times available for public comment hearings. The board has tried very, very hard with its past rule series that have been open to schedule these at different days, different times, to try to capture schedules, that it won't be the same from one person to the next. And then, of course, there is the public comment period where people have the opportunity to submit comments in writing, regardless of whether or not they're able to attend those hearings. So this is just the beginning. It is certainly not the end. And I wanted to provide that reassurance. So with that, I think we have concluded our public comment hearing or portion of the meeting. What I would like to do at this point is move us into executive session to meet with our attorney, and then we'll return out of executive session to discuss the updates that have been proposed. I've got a presentation just to kind of reorient us to the work that's been done since we met as a full board last Wednesday. But at this point, I think what I'd like to do is move that the board finds that premature general public knowledge of confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the body would clearly place the board at a substantial disadvantage. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, was that Tom who seconded?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. And Maureen, since I can't see everybody, I would ask if you don't mind doing a roll call on the vote.
Sure thing.
Thank you. So this is just voting on the motion.
Tom Lovett,
Yes.
Leah Wilburn,
Yes.
Kimberly Gleason,
Yes.
Rich Werner, Tammy Colby,
Yes.
Lyle Jepson is absent. Jenna Farrell, not here yet. Mohammed Job,
Yes.
and Chair Samuelson, will you be voting?
Yes, in the affirmative. Thank you. My second motion is that the board go into executive session to receive confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the body pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1 capital F. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Tom. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Maureen, if you could again do the roll call or call the members.
Yep. Tammy
Thank
Colby,
Yes.
Leah Wilburn,
Yes.
Kimberly Gleason,
Yes.
Mohammed Job,
Yes.
Tom Lovett,
Yes.
and will Chair Samuelson be voting?
Yes, in the affirmative. All right, thank you, Maureen. So at this point, the board is going to exit this meeting, and we have a link for the executive session. So click out of this meeting and then go into the other meeting to enter executive session. Thank you. Oh, Sarah, I see your hand is raised.
I'll join you shortly. I'm waiting for someone to send me the link to the executive session.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna go back and pick up where we left off. This is now agenda item D, which is going to be the discussion to the proposed updates to Rule Series 2200, to be followed by a vote to initiate formal Administrative Procedures Act rulemaking process. And before we jump into our discussion, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes just kind of reorienting us where we are. So let me just make sure I've got all my ducks in a row here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen?
No, not yet.
Not yet here either.
Does that work?
No.
No. Huh, okay. Hang on just a second. Okay, how about that?
No. Oh, here we go.
It's loading.
Yeah.
All right, great. So just remember, I can't see you, so if anyone has any questions, just shout out. So this is just to reorient us, reminder who has been serving on the committee, and then the general overview of the 3 buckets of work that the committee has addressed in the proposed updates, which again, I'm just going to blow through this slide because each of these 3 are addressed in subsequent slides. So first, I just kind of wanted to remind everyone of the process to craft the language that embodies the goals of Act 1. So how did we get to the language that is now in proposed updates to 2200? So it kind of starts with Act 1 of 2019. The language of the Act itself created a working group and invited it to review state statutes, state board rules, school district and supervisory union policies that concern or impact standards for student performance or curriculum used in schools. So that working group was formed in 2019. Obviously, the pandemic made everything take longer than anyone anticipated. But after 2 years of evaluation, the working group proposed updates to Rule Series 2000, which are the education quality standards, or as I would call them, EQS, and presented them to the state board at its April 20th, 2022 meeting. So again, this will tie into where we are with 2200, but this is kind of the beginning of the story. So the working group had its proposed updates to EQS. That came to the state board about 1.5 years ago. The state board then formed an EQS committee to consider the proposed updates from the working group, and the EQS committee then met 28 times over the course of the following year to hear testimony, discuss, and deliberate possible revisions to the EQS rules. So the revisions to the EQS rules, which the state board voted on in May to begin the APA rulemaking process with that rule series, represents the efforts of a diverse group of stakeholders to ensure that the rules are anti-racist, culturally responsive, anti-discriminatory, and inclusive. And I should pause here just to acknowledge the monumental amount of work that was done by the working group, as well as by the EQS committee to really, take the goals that were embodied in Act 1 and really, put it in the first instance to the education quality standards. It was an awful lot of work that was done. It was very thoughtful and comprehensive, and really allowed where we are now to be streamlined. So once we met in May of this year to consider the updates to EQS, There had been a suggestion by the Act 1 working group to apply the entire body of the education quality standards to independent schools, not just the updates that were brought about because of Act 1. So the education quality standards, pursuant to 16 VSA 165, that provides the statutory authority for the board to craft rules that would then implement the goals of 16 VSA 165. So that's our statutory authority. What the board found is that Section 165 only applies to independent schools if, pursuant to Section 165F, an independent school seeks designation as an independent school meeting education quality standards. So at that point, we had a discussion as a board and felt that trying to take the entire body of EQS and applying it to independent schools was beyond what the legislature had asked us to do in Act 1 or otherwise. So at our May meeting, the board decided that we did concur that we thought that it was important to bring the principles of Act 1 to independent schools, but the more appropriate mechanism for doing that was pursuant to the statutory authority that's granted to the board in 16 VSA section 164.14 to adopt rules for approval of independent schools. So we've been very clear all along that, we as a board believe that these goals and principles should be applied to independent schools. And in part because, now we're looking at two different rule series, we felt that it was very important to have both rule series open at the same time for a couple of reasons. One is public comment received in one rule series can be considered by the board with regard to the other rule series, so that we end up with consistency and uniformity between the two rules as it applies to bringing in the principles and goals of Act 1. And then, of course, the other reason is that it aligns, and you'll see this at the end, with the effective dates. We've tried really hard to have the effective dates aligned as well, so that there's no confusion. And as a board, we are uniform in our position that, we are bringing this body of work to schools in Vermont. And so that brings us to what we've called the lift and shift. So the EQS committee had identified 5 subsections of Rule Series 2000 that were applicable to independent schools. I've listed those out there. The 2200 committee used this as its starting point and brought this language into the proposed updates to Rule Series 2200. For the most part, these rules were literally, copied and pasted into 2200. Again, we really benefited from the amount of work that had been done in the first instance by the Act 1 working group, and then in the follow-up by the EQS committee. There have been some instances where that language has changed just because we're applying it in a different rule series. And we have been very faithful in terms of creating a side-by-side that notes where those changes are, just so that anyone can really see very easily visually any changes that have been made. We are trying, to make it clear to anyone who's looking at this, where the changes have occurred and why. The second bucket of work that we did was the annual compliance assurance. And this is, I talked about this last week in our meeting. We have some new language in there that we'll talk about in a little bit, but we've set January 15th of each year as the deadline by which approved schools must attest to their continued compliance. And we also set forth the procedure to follow if a school doesn't submit an acceptable form that is compliant with due process considerations. And then the third bucket was we created a procedure by which to recognize accrediting organizations. So this framework includes 11 criteria with which interested accrediting organizations must comply. And what that does is it leads to a streamlined approval process, but it's important to note that whether or not a school is accredited by an accrediting organization doesn't change the secretary's obligation to review the school's compliance when we get to the approval process. So accreditation is just a different, lane by which to get to approval, but there's still the same oversight by the agency with regard to a recommendation for a school to be approved that then comes before the state board for its review. So that's clearly laid out, and we can go through that as well. And then in a moment, I will, turn this over. Sorry, I lost my spot here. To Sarah, just to highlight the changes that we've made since our meeting last Wednesday. There's some minor changes that we will discuss, and then we also have some more significant updates, and I've just listed those out there, but I think that is the end of my presentation. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to come back in, and if no one has any questions, I'll turn it over to Sarah to kind of walk us through the changes. All right, so Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. So I'm going to walk through the changes that were made since Wednesday. Jen, I also have in the draft that I'm sharing a few of some potential changes that this group may decide to make that was the result of some feedback from other members since Wednesday that's been pre-drafted for this meeting. So if you want, we can just go through it in order of all the changes. Okay.
Sure.
So the first change that the committee made was in the statement of purpose. The committee brought in, they took the definition of discrimination that was previously drafted in the definition section, which comes after this section, and reiterated this as a value statement here. And the, I think the important points to point out in this section are that it's the first paragraph is largely taken from the definition of discrimination. And then the second is sort of restates what was the third paragraph at that previously. And it also, rather than a direct prohibition on additional discrimination to new protected classes, it describes how discrimination in that form does not embody the intent of the board to promote welcoming, inclusive, bias-free environments for learning in Vermont schools. Those are the changes in the first section. Next, at the bottom of the statement of purpose, because the definition you'll see in the next section has changed in discrimination, it makes this sentence, this manual adopts a definition of discrimination that is broader than its legal definition, unnecessary. So I believe there may be a motion here to strike that sentence. Now be careful as I zoom, don't get dizzy. All right, so this is the new definition of discrimination. It reads, discrimination is intended to describe any exclusion, restriction, or preference based on any protected class consistent with state and federal law that has the purpose or effect of denying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise of an individual's fundamental rights. Discrimination is practiced by individuals and groups and is expressed systematically through the structures, laws, practices, and policies of public and private institutions, employers, and organizations. Flag that change. And I just realized I'm missing a comma. And again, I'll be careful here with your, don't get dizzy. The other addition that the committee made, and this will make a little bit more sense as we go down to some other changes. In the section that restated what was previously the non-discrimination statement and policy, we also added a requirement that the agency develop a method to assess a school's compliance with the non-discrimination statement and policy, which shall be used to investigate both complaints of non-compliance, and it shall be used by the agency when it's evaluating applications for approval by accredited and non-accredited schools. And you further requested or required that the method would provide indicators of compliance, and it would be made available to schools, so publicly available, so that they can use it for their ongoing self-assessment of compliance with non-discrimination regulations. So I'm going to keep going. There was a comment that from a board member from the previous meeting that corrected the name of the, or updated, I should say, the name of the sex offender registry. So this is now as we understand it, the correct reference to the sex offender registry. And in this section, another member of the board felt it was a little unclear whether it was just work study students who are on the sex offender registry from working in schools, or if it applied to others. And while 16 VSA 260 is specifically about work study students, the committee also agreed to clarify that, of course, no employee, volunteer, or work study student would be permitted to work at a school. Proceeding down, this section, excuse me, for context, this is in one of the two sections that list the actual required activities of approved schools. You will note later on, and you've seen this, that in the criteria for accrediting agencies to become recognized by the state, one of the criteria is that as an agency, it needs to include it needs to ensure that all the schools that they approve have a policy that promotes equitable, just, or have practices that promote equitable, just, and inclusive community of adults and students, foster a culture of learning, and inspire students to respect and value diversity in its many forms. One of the comments that was received after the last board meeting and reviewing the draft was that it seemed to imply that if the recognized accrediting agencies had that as a criteria, we would also need to know that in general, that's a requirement of all approved schools, so that both accredited and unaccredited schools are reviewed for that compliance through the approval process. So now it is now a requirement, universally applied. In the next section, which is still part of the list of requirements for approved schools, we've added this clause at the very end that I'm highlighting right now. Schools are encouraged to provide the data to local education agencies. This is to reflect that when schools are measuring the attainment of standards as they are required to do and reporting those to the Secretary of Education as they are required to do, that they're encouraged to make efforts to share this data with local education agencies. A member pointed out that in the EQS rules, local education agencies have duties and requirements, or will have duties and requirements to report and review data, and that includes data from approved independent schools. And so in order to facilitate that, that exchange of data directly with the LEAs would be important. We landed on are encouraged to provide data because in 166G in the statute, it expressly just assigns a duty to the secretary. And I've also noted in research that this is the topic of some conversation in the previous legislative session. So it seems as though this authority is certainly ripe for some legislative action potentially. So for now, this is an encouraging schools to provide data to local education agencies. At the last meeting, I believe one member of this group, and I can't recall who, wondered if there should be, and a committee member had even before this. Oh, sorry, Jen, I do see your hand up.
That's okay, I was muted. I just wanted to point out too, with regard to the encouraged to provide data to the local education agencies, the other thing that the committee landed on is we added in, we threw in the requirement of 16 VSA 166G so that if that language changes, This serves as a placeholder. And like,
That's
so if the legislature decides that they want the information to go to someone other than the secretary, the rule will sort of just flow into compliance with it.
Thank you. So now we're talking about 2223.4, which is the new annual compliance assurance. Since the last time you saw this, the committee decided that this requirement would require schools to submit this form on or before January 15th of every year. Not to speak for committee members, but the discussion really landed on this date because they felt that the process that follow if a school failed to submit an annual compliance assurance would give sufficient time for parents to know whether or not their school was continued, would be approved by the board by the time their student their child might be enrolled later in the year. Additionally, one of the members here since the last meeting highlighted that there seemed to be many duties assigned to the secretary in this set of rules. And so I did go through and change where it wasn't statutorily required or didn't kind of make sense. I changed that over to the agency so that it was clear that the agency had the responsibility for doing this. In addition, we clarified, because I think there was some confusion, that this annual compliance assurance, while there is the ability for the secretary and the agency, I should say, to create the content of this form, it sets as a minimum requirement that it needs to have the non-discrimination requirements for approved schools and the procedure for ensuring the provision of special education to publicly funded students in approved schools, if that's applicable. So remember, back what we spoke about earlier before, the non-discrimination requirements for approved schools now also has that methodology that the agency is going to develop so that there's less opportunity for subjective review of compliance with non-discrimination requirements. And that will be incorporated into this annual assurance. All right, I'm going to skim down a little bit further. Since the Wednesday meeting, another member raised a concern about some lack of clarity with whether or not the recognized accreditation agencies had the duty, responsibility, or authority to determine whether a school was in compliance with the non-discrimination provisions. And this clarifies that in the approval process, the agency is responsible for conducting an independent review of the school's compliance with non-discrimination provisions, both of these rules and of applicable law. Already, the agency is to create a report. This would be part of the report. You'll see that this is highlighted in green just for the approval process for accredited independent schools. That doesn't, it's placed here because the standard application process for unaccredited schools already has the agency going through a more significant review, and this would be part of their report that they would submit to the agency. I'm sorry, to the board. And now I'm scrolling right down to, I'm going to go up to the top so you can see where we are. The board approval, if you recall, there's an application process. The agency has a role to play in both types of application, both for accredited and non-accredited schools. But the board accepts that report or reviews that report from the agency and makes its own independent findings. So in the case of unaccredited schools, the board would make the findings you've already seen, and we added in, as I noted earlier, the finding that a school promotes equitable, just, and inclusive community for adult students, fosters, I may need to make a little grammar correction there, fosters a culture of learning, inspires students to respect and value diversity in its many forms. That, again, is just repeating what we were aiming for earlier, and that is that that this provision applies to schools who are seeking approval who are not going through the accreditation process. The board would need to make that finding. And then to complement what we noted above in terms of accredited schools seeking reapproval or seeking approval, when the board makes its findings, this would be after the agency conducts its independent investigation of compliance with non-discrimination. The board receives that report, and so among the more findings that the board needs to make for accredited schools, one of them will now be that the agency has independently certified compliance with the non-discrimination provisions of the rules and applicable law. So that complements that earlier requirement that the agency conduct that investigation. And I believe, this is, now we're in the section 2227, and this is the section related to the criteria in the process by which accrediting agencies can become recognized by the state, by the board. And we revised criterion number 11 so that the agencies who are requesting approval to be recognized would agree to review and share evidence of practices in compliance with state-specific requirements if it's requested by the agency. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. But this is not a requirement that they review practices in compliance with state-specific requirements. They still may, as part of their own accreditation process. But if the agency asks them to share, to review and share information, they need to be amenable to that, to working with the agency. And the one thing that the agency can't delegate out in terms of review and gathering evidence would be the responsibility of reviewing and determining compliance with non-discrimination provision of these rules. Again, this aligns with those other components we just discussed about the agency having responsibility to make that investigation and to present that report and have those findings. I kind of saw Kim's hand go up. Do you want me to pause? Yeah, go ahead.
If it's okay, Jen.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So twice we're saying the agency has to make the determination on compliance. And so I actually had the same question above. I know this section is related to the accrediting agencies will recognize, but if a school is accredited, and are we confining what the agency needs to confirm they've seen evidence of to just those related to non-discrimination? Or wouldn't we want them to be confirming they've seen evidence of all Vermont specific laws and requirements? And so I'm thinking, do they have a fire drill schedule? Is a yes or no. Is that schedule compliant with our law? Is evidence or indicators? And so I'm just concerned by qualifying that the agency has responsibility for confirming that they've seen evidence of those as it relates to non-discrimination practices. May suggest that they shouldn't have to see evidence of the other things on accredited schools. So I think my first question on it really was in the part above. I think it should flow to here, and I think we should discuss whether or not that is limiting what they're supposed to be looking at.
Okay.
Unless I'm misunderstanding.
I'll tell you where you landed on that matter. and I'll just skim up above so you guys are looking at the same language. Again, forgive the scrolling. So for both accredited and unaccredited schools, they both have this language right here that we had loosely called before the Vermont rider, but instead of creating a separate standard for approval and a standard for annual compliance assurance, you had decided at that point, and I know this is a work in progress, you had decided that you would use that same attestation in order to determine compliance with Vermont specific pieces, knowing that the agency still looks at that attestation, which would be refreshed at the time of approval, as does the board, and both have an opportunity to further probe and further question the answers that are provided in that form. So that's how it exists now. And you are right, we did add a specific but not limiting requirement that specifically directs the agency to make that finding and conduct that investigation with the non-discrimination provisions. Fire drills are not part of that, and some of the thinking might be related back to that section 11. The agency may say to all accrediting agencies, these are the Vermont specific provisions we wish for you to include as a condition of your accreditation. And it would be up to the agency's discretion, except for non-discrimination, what those would be. And that report that would go to the agency and to the board at the 5-year mark would obviously reflect, if they're not in good standing, then they aren't remaining compliant with those provisions. So that's how it stands now, but I know that's not really, you're sort of thinking it may need to be different.
I'm just thinking it would be unfortunate to find out 5 years later, yeah, they've got something like a fire drill schedule, but there wasn't evidence provided as they're attesting to it, and they're not actually doing them. So it hadn't occurred to me, but for the juxtaposition to that particular call out, and it suggested to me then that the agency would not be looking for them to attach their fire drill schedule and checkoffs or other Vermont specific requirements that would be part of their attestation annually. So I'm offering that for us to consider or think about. And
if you want, I'll Chair, if you want to pause there and have discussion, or if you want me to run through the last 2 changes, we can return right back to this.
Yeah, is that okay, Kim? Like, let's just.
Absolutely. I was going to wait till the end, but then it came up a second time, and I thought I should at least flag it for us to talk about it. It's not because I do want the green there. I want to make sure we haven't, by virtue of putting the green there, suggested that the agency doesn't really need to ensure that their attestations have any validity to them. So,
so recall that in this submission process, moving on to the next green part, the agencies will describe to you, the board, how they meet all of these requirements. And you may, as part of your request, just to answer your question, Kim, or maybe point to an area where you could use flexibility right now, you could, just in the course of your decision making, really press them on their substantial understanding and familiarity with Vermont state laws and policies, and on an ongoing basis, as you feel necessary, you could place conditions on them as they're becoming approved that they do certain things if you feel safety requirements are in order or other Vermont specific things are very important to the board, you can always revisit that. But at the very least, another member raised an interest in wanting to see, even though the accrediting agency won't have the role of certifying compliance with non-discrimination provisions, there is an interest in making sure that the board has visibility into the methodology that an accrediting agency would have in meeting and advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and other non-discriminatory practices. And this reflects that, as I understand it, the accrediting agencies play two roles. One is for the purposes of the board, you look to them as a compliance measure, but for the purposes of the schools and society at large and parents and students, that accrediting process is always a self-improvement journey, as I understand it. And so this is why it's not just meeting, but it's also continuously advancing. So that's, except I'm going to scroll very quickly now because it's at the very end of the document. The very last change was, see if I can make this, was to the effective dates. And just to orient you to where the committee landed, all sections will become effective 15 days after adoption, which would include, in this case, the annual compliance assurance and the process for recognizing accrediting agencies, except that the new reconfigured application process and the requirements of independent schools, with two exceptions, those would become effective next July 1. And that is because in each of those pieces, there's a little role for the agency to play in sort of aligning their role to support you in enforcing this. The two that will not be effective, the two provisions that will not be effective July 1 of next year are the requirement for new curriculum and the provision of ethnic studies programs and the specific instructor and educator support titled instructional strategies that both of which come from Act 1 and were lifted from EQS. The July 1, 2025 deadline puts these two provisions on the same path for public and independent schools. So with that, that's the summary of changes and proposed changes since Wednesday. And I'll scroll back up to where we paused with Kim, and then I'll turn it over to the committee. And I'm happy to type. I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll let you guys deliberate.
So, and Kim, do you mind just going back which rule? And I just want to make sure I'm following.
I don't think I have the green highlighted document, so I'm not sure that I'm going to find it quickly. I think we are saying that in two places that the agency will independently evaluate. Thank you.
Yes.
Compliance with the non-discriminatory practices provisions of these rules and applicable law. I just am wondering, the other Vermont specific, by virtue of saying that, are we suggesting that they shouldn't be independently evaluating the other Vermont specific rules, related law and rules? Independent reviews schools' compliance with all Vermont specific regulation and statute to include
So I'm looking, so the secretary reviews the application materials, which takes us back to 2224.2.1, which is evidence of accreditation, assurances of compliance with state-specific requirements set forth in 2223.3.4, 2223.3.5, or state law, request to receive public funds if applicable, and the unmodified annual compliance assurance in 2223.4. And I'm wondering, because I was thinking about this earlier, the 2223.4 then references 2223.2. So I'm kind of wondering if, because we keep referencing back, if we do capture the universe of the rules for compliance by virtue of having the annual attestation form as well as the other certifications, and if that kind of gets at what you're looking for, Kim.
Yeah, and the back and forth is hard for me to make sure and understanding it. And maybe the challenge to my thinking is the annual attestation falling into a self-assessment category. We also said that it should describe a process and indicators that would assist in application, reapplication, and annual assessments, but we're not requiring any evidence on those annual assessments or self-assessments, nor are we explicitly saying that we'll be presented with that evidence and reapprovals. So did we miss something, I think, is my question. And while I'm saying that for people to think about, or the committee to sort of remind me what we did in that front, I'm going to look at the back and forth that happens in this section and see if it gets it.
I think you're right. I'm pulling us back up. I'm just bringing the attention to the compliance piece. We did change the word from rubric or tool to method, feeling that was broad enough for the agency to contemplate the best way to articulate exactly what would it look like to be compliant and define what those indicators are. And obviously the indicators would be, I think we're assuming that the indicators will say what's good and what's bad. And that tool could be used by schools and in investigations and in this approval process. But you are right, Kim, that the method is only for reviewing the non-discrimination procedures because there was such a concern over subjectivity. I think the other examples that came up in the committee were more straightforward, and the committee felt more comfortable allowing the accrediting agencies who typically review for those things during those reviews to work with the agency in fulfilling that role. But I'm just recapping what I thought was the conversation of the committee.
Is there a problem with us saying the annual attestation will include attached evidence? That would capture all of it. Like if we know what the indicators are and we say attach the evidence, it means you got a policy on whatever, non-discrimination and enrollment, just include what that policy is as an attachment. And if we're going to otherwise need to evaluate whether the agency does or the independent school committee does have to evaluate things or we're looking for specific evidence, why wouldn't we ask for it? Like we don't have to say what that is, but whatever it is that's determined that those indicators are, why wouldn't we want it every time? And I'm putting that out to the group because maybe there's some reason we either can't or wouldn't be the intention. It just strikes me as possibly solving the problem.
So I see Tammy's hand raised and then Mohammed. I don't know if this is in response to Kim's suggestion or if you have other.
Well, I think for me, couple things. Back to Kim's point, I think, and it's hard for me to see on the screen, but I think Counselor Buxton has gone to the section that says that they do have to provide necessary evidence, and that's what I was remembering. So Kim, I think they have to provide the evidence along with it.
I just added that, Tammy,
Oh,
what
did
you're
you?
looking at
Okay,
in green.
okay.
As Kim was talking, I'm
Okay,
kind of
thanks.
thinking,
It's just, it's hard to track on the screen.
Yes.
Yeah, multiple screens open. But
Yeah.
I'll just raise my hand and say, you know, I was the person who was really pushing on that issue around having a method. I think that the agency does need to have a clear and consistent approach that is applied equally, and that needs to be well articulated. And so, you know, back up to what the intent is here. And if you want to scroll back up, sorry, I can't do
that's okay.
documents. You know, I think, you know, I want to be clear that I feel really strongly that we need to have a well-articulated method. You can call it method, framework, whatever you want to call it. But there needs to be a standardized way that the agency assesses school compliance with this subsection. Full stop. And it needs to be standardized because we cannot have a situation where there are different interpretations of what non-discrimination is and is not. And this is at the heart. This is at the very heart of what we're talking about here with our equity goals, right? Like, we can't get non-discrimination right and make sure that all students are protected against that in a consistent way across all schools, public and independent, then the rest of the stuff unwinds. So I mean, I just want to put that in there. Like, I think this is really important that we have a clear statement, a clear method by which we assess the school's compliance with this subsection. And then we monitor that. And, you know, to the ad right here, sure, have the evidence come in. That's fine. We can see that. But there needs to be a clear method, a clear framework that's applied universally and equally, right, to all schools. And now I'll get off my soapbox.
Okay, well, and let me just, Mohammed, did you have a comment on this issue before I go back to Kim?
Yeah, along the same line with Kim and Tammy, I just wanted to say the indicators we're looking for or the evidence could actually be presented as a checklist to provide the evidence. But I cannot disagree with Kim and Tammy along those lines. I support the idea.
Great. Thank you. Kim?
And so I think what I'm left making sure I understand here is that we are expecting that the attestation includes the evidence. The way that section right there was written read to me like the rubric or whatever the method is exists. Here's what the indicators would be. We're not necessarily going to see them, but if there's a complaint against you or you're up for reapproval, we're going to look at it, which is different than, I think, as I understand it, than saying an annual attestation with indicators of evidence of compliance, attach them, done. And for year over year, if you've got your policy against whatever that is being sought in the annual attestation, that may not change at all, and it's really not particularly onerous. It's just, to Mohammed's suggestion, it could in fact be a checklist of attached documentation that meets those indicators. Because otherwise it sounds like it just comes up if there's a complaint, or at least that other section did. Review complaints before reapplication or approval or something like that is what it said.
If you can see the green in here, instead of adding it up in the non-discrimination section, because that is only for non-discrimination, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking that if you direct the agency when they make the form for it not just to be something they sign, and be clear that you want the agency to require them to provide evidence, and this is not just of non-discrimination, it must require evidence of non-discrimination, but you're giving the agency the authority to pick all of them, and they can go directly to the section in 2223 with all the requirements. And we did this specifically so they might be able to just lift and put that into a form and say under each one of your bullets, here's the piece of evidence that shows us. And that could be the shape of the form that they take. You declined in going as far as to be so prescriptive, knowing that the legislature is changing all the time. But I'm wondering if what I've just put in green, not blue, but in green, may meet some of the concerns that both Kim and Mohammed are raising.
I'm not hearing any disagreement. Tom?
Well, I have a question. What does this look like in practice? What's the agency going to do? And how many attachments will there be to these annual attestations? Because it feels to me a little bit like every year the school provides the evidence that they provide every time they come up for approval. It feels like it's more than just a little bit of work. I think it does feel onerous to me, depending on how much we're talking about. The two pieces of the attestation that I think are critical here are non-discrimination and the ability to serve students with special needs. And so they're going to test that. I think that's what the two sections of the form will be, if I'm reading it correctly. Yeah. And
right.
so I think if we limited it to those two things, then that would be then I'm okay with it. But if we start adding everything in 22, 23.4 and 0.5, I want to know who's going to actually look at it. Is the agency actually going to review all of those things every single year for every approved independent school? So I don't want to make work that doesn't serve a purpose, especially if every 5 years there is a deeper dive. But I think the two sections that are listed here as being part of the annual attestation, I think that might make some sense.
Tom, are you proposing that the green language is unnecessary?
Yes. Well, I think that if we wanted them to provide evidence, which again, I have the practical question of who's going to look at it and what are they going to do with it, then I suggest that the evidence only be on those two things, the non-discrimination, which we already have put in there, and maybe add the procedure for ensuring provision of special education services.
So could it be, and now I'm looking at the highlighted language, the form shall include the school's attestation, comma, and necessary supporting evidence, comma, that it meets the requirements of subsection 2223.2, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about how to wordsmith it, but I'm thinking that the evidence should be directly related to the things that they are attesting to. And Kim's point about the back to the accrediting agencies, the agency does have the responsibility to check on those on the compliance. And they can use the accrediting agency if they want, which is what they have done in the past with NEASC for some of those things. These rules will give them still that ability, but it doesn't require, we're not telling the agency how to do their job. We tell them they have the responsibility, and they can use the accrediting agencies if they want.
Kim? And then
So I feel like if we make that compliance with 2229 in its entirety, I would think that makes sense. That becomes enrollment requirements for approved independent school students and LEAs, because that section is approval to receive public tuition, and then semicolon special ed approval. And then the point 2 is staffing, point 3 is assurances, point 4 is procedure for ensuring the provisions of special ed. So if we don't isolate it to point 4, then I think that could make sense. I'm not sure what other. I don't know if that helps or hurt or makes it. I'm looking further down the point.
Yeah, like I'm not sure that 2229 point. Well, I mean, maybe if it's applicable. Like if we should include all of 2229 or just certain subsections of it.
I think it's more than just 4, I guess is what I'm getting.
Yeah.
I'm scrolling down further now, and it is a lot, but I'm not exactly sure, like if we were to find that they can't continue to comply with that, then they can't continue to get public tuition. So like that's an annual decision. If not, otherwise.
Like point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4.
5 is out of state. I think that's going to be driven by 828. If they're out of state, it may be that if 828 started to say out of state had meant something, that it would be something we'd want to see an annual attestation to. I just am not.
What if we did 2229.1 through 2229.5?
I'm just looking at the ones that go past that.
You do have the if applicable, and so it won't apply to everyone. And I'm assuming that the agency will look at things like, I'm looking at point 2 with staffing and thinking through how they may ask for evidence. And if there's no evidence to be asked for, it's just in this case, it's a directive for the secretary, then that wouldn't appear on your form and evidence wouldn't be there. But doesn't sound like there would be a problem, at least at first blush, with including those sections. I just wanted to point out that not every section seems conducive to having that checklist be available.
So I'm sorry, Jen, did you say through 0.5 in case there are changes in 828? So I think that might capture it for me. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's better than just confining it to 0.4, I think. And I think those are things that actually have an annual obligation on the LEA to determine, if they're meeting their requirements for students with special needs, and consequently whether or not they're paying tuition and meeting their obligations as well. So I think if we broaden that to 1 through 5, and the agency can determine what evidence they'd be looking for to, again, I think, Tom, in some cases it's just they already have that process and policy established, and unless it's updating, they're just copying and pasting from the previous year the link or however they would do it. But I do think part of the challenge I've noticed, and you would know better than I on the Independent Schools Committee, And I don't mean to keep going back to an example, but there was an example of the agency's recommendation that we approve a school. The independent school committee noticed that the language on the website didn't reflect what the attestation was saying. We posed that back as a conditional approval, and then that independent school, rather than changing their website, withdrew their application for approval. And so you ended up doing sort of investigatory work that if the evidence were necessary to have been provided, it would have missed that mark, or the agency would have said conditional approval based on, because we got a full application, it included the attestation, this is inconsistent with the attestation. So it would be, they would have recommended a conditional approval, for instance. But you guys ended up having to ferret it out after. So if there are things we know that there should be standards for some degree of evidence, it would make sense to me that we can't just take the self-attestation if we might later refute that attestation because the evidence doesn't match. Right?
Yeah, again, it would be the agency who will be reviewing the evidence. It won't necessarily be our committee. We'll get the report from the agency. And ostensibly, they already are doing that before they come to our committee. So I'm fine with if we're not going to take their word on the attestation and want to see the evidence, I'm fine with having some indicators that back up what they sign on the two pieces of the attestation. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm not sure how useful it will be in practice, but as you say, if you have a policy, if you have agreement for services with districts and you attach them, it's not going to be a lot of work.
Yep. And if you've got an enrollment, procedure that complies with point 1 or whatever it is, it complies. You're just giving it to us. If you go and change that next year, you're going to report that. And, you are doing so saying it still complies, but there's been a change and it's able to be easily accessed if necessary. And you're right, we can't say what the agency is necessarily going to do with that, but I think it offers more accountability to what's intended with the attestation. And it maybe articulates more clearly what's expected, which should benefit everybody.
So I'm just pointing out it is almost 2:30, which this is all good work, but I'm just sort of noting that for us. Mohammed.
All that had been said just sent me back to a blind side that we have not discussed. Talking about self-assessment would be internal assessment from the school. Now I'm thinking of the unheard. And when I say the unheard, I'm talking about students, I'm talking about families who may feel some injustice around special education, who might complain about something. When that happened and the school self-assesses themselves, how about the blind side complaints? How would those align with the self-assessments? I mean, just referring to all the methodology to actually approve somebody or some entity, some school. I'm just thinking about the blind side. Yes, we're allowing the school to assess themselves. How about the unheard people?
Jen, do you want me to try to take a stab at showing Mohammed where at least where in the rules this is somewhat addressed, and it may not be to your satisfaction, but I want to show you what's here. In the the annual compliance assurance, if the school does not submit a complete unmodified form, and I believe it would be the secretary who would determine whether or not it's complete, then the secretary is now directed to immediately begin an investigation. But that's for the instance where it's not the unheard people. That's when it's very much out in the open, and there's an issue that may be presenting itself with the way that the school is presenting evidence. In the case of complaints, the requirement right now is for, and this is statutory, is for complaints to go through an investigation process, as you indicated, and for the board to take a recommendation from the secretary and conduct a hearing on those matters before it does anything to revoke, suspend, or now I'm missing the third one. Oh, revoke, suspend, or approve a school. So in the case of a complaint, any individual at any time, particularly this is here for those who are unheard, a family that's aggrieved, didn't feel like they had an opportunity to apply to a school because the application process was discriminatory. They may lodge a complaint directly to the secretary, and then the secretary does almost a two-part investigation. The first starts as an initial investigation, and they have to give notice to the school. The secretary has to give notice to the school. And if it's more of a minor violation, the secretary has the authority to correct the problem. The secretary also has the power to place that school immediately on probation. So that's an important reminder just for the board that this does exist, and that they need to notify the board when they do that, because that sort of is the indicator that more activity is needed. The formal investigation followed by the board. I'll also just note that under statute, any hearing also has to include the Council of Independent Schools, and any minority report that they offer in those hearings must be part of the record by statute. I don't know if that answers your question, but it shows you where in the rules there's some process work, that's included for situations like that.
It absolutely does match
Okay.
what I was thinking, and that's really great that we have it. Yeah.
So just to clarify, as you saw, I was just typing as I was hearing things. Am I okay then to turn the things that are struck out, to delete those, and to turn the things that are green into yellow? Are you all, I'm not asking for a vote because I'm not the chair, but I just, in terms of editing, have I captured where I think you're landing for the moment so you can look at it?
And I think I've heard from Tom and Kim that language works. I've not heard from Tammy, Mohammed, or Aaliyah. And I'll say that I would put myself in the camp of, I think this language works for me.
I'm good. I had a chance to review it. And I appreciate Sarah's efforts to update things on the fly and the additional work she's done here. So just to thank you, Sarah, for being helpful to the board in this.
I'm good as well.
I'm all good with the modifications.
Jen is here too. Jenny just gave a thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
And just as a reminder to myself and all of us, right, this is pre-ICAR, right? We're trying to get a really good, thoughtful, stable draft out there that then is available for public comment through, right? That'll go through ICAR and start, right? We'll have opportunity for public comment. So I would expect that we would have the opportunity to take in, hopefully take in a wide variety of perspectives on the changes here. But my sense is that we've gotten the document to a point where it's a good, stable draft that can serve as a starting point for that conversation.
And in channeling our former chair, John, I think that he would categorize it as trying to get it 90% right in pre-filing. And I think in fairness, we probably could say maybe we aren't able to get quite 90 in the timeline that we were on, but I think we were pretty thoughtful with the hours that we did invest in it. And I think our subcommittee probably spent, did we spend 9 hours, Jen, or our meetings were long? It was definitely somewhere in the 7 to 9 hour range, I'm pretty sure. Deeply engaged with the content in trying to draw the materials over. But again, it's a little different process than we normally do. So thank you for the reminder, Tammy. And you know, I can never help but channel John in these rules cases.
Any other comments or questions about the rules as proposed? I'll let Sarah finish typing here.
If you want me to scroll anywhere else, I can. I'm just going to finish putting those sections in so that what you vote on here is actually reflected in this document. If you decide to accept all those other green changes.
Yeah, so I think I'll let you finish typing, but I think we should probably look at the other changes one last time, just so that we are clear on what we're voting on.
State schools. Okay, I think I've got it. And would you like me to scroll somewhere?
Well, if there's any green highlighting left that we need to convert to yellow, I think that would be good.
Okay. So up here in the statement of purpose, are you okay with eliminating this sentence? Objection.
Yes.
Okay. The next one is, I really apologize for the scrolling. We added standardized as Tammy was, either Tammy or Kim were speaking. I think you used the word standardized and I just threw it in there. Should I make that yellow? Okay.
Yep.
All right. This is the requirement to conduct the independent review. Okay, to make that yellow. All right. And then the complementary part that the board will find that happens. The requirement here that the applicant shall provide their methodology.
Yes.
Okay. And I think, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. The very last was just, I added in, because one member was confused about the dates with commas. So I used parentheticals here.
Can we use brackets instead of parentheticals just to?
Yes. Sure thing.
Just so people aren't having to like count the parentheses.
It's one of the most complicated ones I've come across.
And I don't think you need the parentheses before except. Like, I think you can just start with the bracket.
You got it. There you go. I think that's all the things that were in green since the committee's meeting. Everything else reflects changes. As you know, this includes a whole lot of this rule series that weren't considered. You only focused on the independent school programs, not the post-secondary schools, etc. So the only things that were changed in those other sections were references to what would normally be SBE rule, which is one of the old ways that drafters would refer to one of these subsections. And just for consistency's sake, replace that all with either section or subsection as appropriate. So that's it.
Kim?
So we had talked, and it is not going to be something we're going to have time to discuss or consider now, but I did want to put sort of a pin in the notion of the title of the rule is not fully describing the contents of the rule anymore. So it is more than just approval when we've got, things like ongoing compliance, or I think we had talked about a couple of different potential titles. Because it's the place to look for the ongoing compliance and reapproval. So I flag it. I don't know if it's something we want to, like naming a new building or something. I recognize it's not necessary for right now. I want to say it for the record because it came up in our committee. We couldn't think of necessarily the perfect language to actually describe what it is now. But it is more than just approval, and it might not be adequately reflecting the contents of this rule anymore. So I think with the board's willingness to let us take that up as we consider public comment through the process, I might suggest we consider a different title for the rule. Not today.
Thank you. Any other final thoughts or comments? All right, I'm not hearing any. So with that, I move that the State Board of Education accept the changes to Rule Series 2200 as presented today. And as noted, I don't know, Sarah, if I need to clarify more, that it's the version that we're looking at on the screen.
Here, why don't I, well, let's just for this sake, let's call it version 9. I just renamed it.
Okay. So I'm going to start again. I move that the State Board of Education accept the changes to Rule Series 2200 version 9 and to adopt the proposed revisions of State Board of Education Rule Series 2200. Seconded by Kim Gleason. Any further discussion? Okay, Maureen, could you do a call the
Sure.
Thank you.
Kimberly Gleason,
Yes.
Jenna O'Farrell,
Yes.
Mohammed Job,
Yes.
Tom Lovett,
Yes.
Aaliyah Wilburn,
Yes.
Tammy Colby,
Yes.
will Chair Samuelson be voting?
Yes, in the affirmative.
That's 7.
All right. Thank you. I further move that the chair be directed to initiate formal APA rulemaking process for the board's proposed revisions of Rule Series 2200 version 9 and authorize the chair to prepare and submit the required economic impact analysis.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, Maureen, if you could again call the roll.
Sure. Tammy Colby,
Yes.
Mohammed Job, Mohammed Job,
Yes.
Aaliyah Wilburn,
Yeah.
Kimberly Gleason,
Yes.
Jenna O'Farrell,
Yes.
Tom Lovett,
Yes.
will Chair Samuelson be voting?
Yes, in the affirmative.
7 again.
All right, thank you. So thank you, everybody. Just so we're clear, the next steps will be, I will work with Attorney Buxton to get the paperwork filed. It will be filed with the Secretary of State. It will also be filed with ICAR. I believe the hearing will be sometime on September the 11th. So we'll do that. And then, of course, once we officially begin the formal APA rulemaking process, we will be scheduling a series of public comment hearings, as we've done with other rule series. We will again try to schedule them at different times and days of the week to capture as many competing schedules as people have. And then of course, people can always submit in writing. And then I also wanted to point out that I will follow up on the public comment that was raised earlier today about the interpretive language needs. And this would apply, I would say, both to 2200 as well as the public comment hearings that are coming up in EQS, to make sure that the hearings will be accessible. So I appreciate the comment, and I'll work with the agency as well to get that done. So any concluding remarks or advice or comments? All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time and attention and care that you've brought to this meeting today. I think we got really good work done. And before we adjourn, we do have additional public comment. So thanking everyone, and especially Attorney Buxton, for really being available to help get us to this point. Very much appreciative. So with that, it looks like there's a phone number ending in 7348. *6 to unmute.
Hi, my name is, hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Representative Elizabeth Burrows, and I have just two quick questions clarifying. One, can you please explain what Sarah Buxton's role is here? And two, could you please read out loud, as I'm on the phone and I haven't had privy to what was on the screen. Could you please read out the proposed changed statement of purpose? Thank you.
Sure. So Attorney Buxton has been retained to provide legal advice to the board with regard to opening Rule Series 2200, with regard to implementing the principles and goals of Act 1 to the independent school approval rules that are set forth in Rule Series 2200, as well as to put something into the rules regarding the annual assurance compliance form, and also to craft language revolving around accrediting agencies that would be recognized by the State Board of Education. I think, we've spent a lot of time talking about Act 1. The board has been very clear that we've wanted to bring that language to be applied to independent schools. We felt that this was the appropriate mechanism to do that. With regard to the annual assurance compliance form, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm getting pinged. With regard to the annual assurance compliance form, that was something that became clear to the board last year that was lacking in the rules, so we wanted to close that gap. And then with regard to the accrediting agencies, we are sunsetting Rule Series 7000 effective July 1st, 2024. And when we appeared before LCAR, we did indicate that we would put a framework into the 2200 Rule Series. So we're just following up on that work as well. Sarah, I will let you read the statement of purpose, if you could.
Sure, I'll read the changes. It's also available on the website because the committee just approved the changes as they were proposed. So it says the board believes that any distinction, exclusion, classification, restriction, or preference based on any ground, such as race, ethnicity, skin color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identification, language, religion, political or other opinion, disability, national, social, or geographic origin, citizenship or immigration status, income or property, birth or other status, which has the purpose or effect of denying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise of fundamental rights and freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field, should be carefully considered and rejected if it results in unlawful discrimination or interferes with the delivery of effective, available, and equitable educational opportunities. The board recognizes that discrimination is practiced by individuals and groups and is expressed systematically through the structures, laws, practices, and policies of public and private institutions, employers, and organizations. In addition to the non-discriminatory protections in subsection 2223.2, discrimination against any student pursuing an education or participating in the general life or activities of a school as a result of or based upon ethnicity, caste, language, and linguistic diversity, socioeconomic status, religion, housing status, and non-citizenship or immigration status does not embody the intent of the board to promote welcoming, inclusive, bias-free environments for learning in Vermont schools.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other public comment?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is Herb Olson. Is this the right time to offer a public comment?
Sure.
Yeah, you might be happy to know I'm not offering a comment on the independent school rules. I'm here to ask the board for their help so that I can offer public comments concerning a report required to be filed by the Agency of Education by September 1st of this year. So that's coming up pretty soon. The report is required by Section 9 of Act 176, which was enacted during the 2020 General Assembly. Section 9 calls for the agency to issue a report on school closures to the Senate and House Education Committees. Among other requirements, the agency is required to solicit and consider comments from the public on the subject. I've requested the agency on multiple occasions for information about how to offer comments. One of my legislative representatives has made a similar request on my behalf. Unfortunately, none of these requests have been responded to, so I'm a bit at a loss. As an independent state board composed of Vermonters acting independently from the agency, my sense is that one of your many responsibilities is to give ordinary citizens a voice in the work of the agency. I'm asking you today to ensure that the agency tells the public how they can have their observations and opinions heard on school closures in Vermont, so that they can be included in the report that's supposed to be issued fairly shortly. Thanks for considering my request. I would give you some information. I don't know how you want to identify, my information, how someone can get back to me. My phone number is 401-829-1678, and so a text, of course, could work there. Thank you very much.
Sure. What I would suggest too is if you want to email me with your comment, I can direct it to the appropriate person at the agency and offer it for their consideration. I'm sorry?
Is this the chair of the board?
Yes, I'm sorry, it is.
Yeah,
so
I'm just on the phone. So yeah, I thought that was you. Yes, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, do you have my email address, or I mean, I can, it's Jennifer.
I think post on the board's website.
Perfect.
So I think I can take it from there.
Sure. Okay.
Appreciate your help. Thanks for your hard work.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to be heard? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Sorry, Chair. I still see a hand raised, but I'm not sure who it belongs to.
I think it was 7348, but I think that was Representative Burrows. Am I correct? Yep. But thank you for double checking. All right, I don't even remember. I'm entertaining a motion to adjourn, but I'm not sure that.
I move to adjourn.
Thank you. Moved by Tammy, seconded by Kim Gleason. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please signify by saying nay and raising your hand. Any abstentions? All right, we stand at adjournment. Thank you all very much. Have a great weekend.